Okay, the Great Depression and the New Deal, the period from 1929 to 1940. Now, the origins of the Great Depression nationally. Basically, everything seemed like it was going great as we entered into 1929, but our prosperity depended on some key industries, like automobiles, manufacturing, and construction. And some of those were barely making a profit, and construction was facing losses. Already from 1921 to 1928, more than 5,000 rural banks closed. And basically, because people were buying so much on credit and installments, we kind of had a false wealth. That it looked like everything was going good, but that's because you owed a lot of people a lot of money. But as long as the money kept coming in, it was no problem. Ready for the next slide? We also had a maldistribution and overproduction of goods. Basically, by 1929, 513 individual or families had annual incomes over $1 million. The top 5th percentile of America had 60% of our nation's wealth. Now, why is that? That's capitalism, isn't it? I mean, he who dies with the most toys wins. But why is it bad if that much is locked up in the top 5th? That means the other 95% have 40% of the nation's wealth. What's wrong with that?
Means that more capitalism being reinvested into the economy that can stall.
Yeah, if something happens that stalls the economy, there's not enough wealth among the vox populi, the people, to get the economy restarted and going. What are the economic realities of America at this time? 70% of all Americans lived on under $2,500 a year. 80% of the families had no savings. Well, how are they making it? How are they getting by? Basically, they were living off credit. And we had too much money in too few hands. And the factories were overproducing their goods. As such, they started to lay off their workers because underneath the Hawley-Smoot tariff, tariffs had been raised higher than they ever had before. Hoover sees this and he lowers tariff by as much as 50%, hoping that if we lower the tariffs on other countries, they're going to reciprocate and lower their tariffs against our goods. Everybody done? By the way, Hoover's big deal, or Herbert Hoover, who was our president, his big thing was associationalism. So he tried to get into the factories and say, hey, look, instead of laying off workers, cut their hours. So yeah, I might be making only 70% of what I used to make, but that guy's making something. And Ford actually helped him out, even though they cut the hours by half. That allowed more people to get at least a little bit. Ready? Then, of course, we have Black Tuesday, where the stock market crashes. It wasn't specifically the crash of the stock market that started the Great Depression, but that was kind of the final crack in the dam. Basically, people couldn't pay back their loans, banks weren't getting the monies, stores weren't getting the monies, and it just started a whole cycle that crashed us into what's known as the Great Depression. Now, initially, most people thought that the drop in the stock market was a good idea. Basically, it, take back on elevated prices. And they believed that the government should play a limited role. Why? Because here in America, the government had always played a limited role. About the only thing it did was either raising or lowering tariffs. Right? Indeed, there's Hoover himself. He got together with the leaders of businesses and unions, and he told the unions, hey, accept a lower pay. And he asked the businesses, because they're accepting lower pay, don't lay as many people off. Once again, that's associationalism. He was the guy who used to call these financial crises or panics. He's the guy who changed the name to depression. The reason for that, basically psychological. If someone's panicked, you don't know what the hell's going on, you don't know when it's going to end. But if someone's depressed, well, that's not going to last forever. And I don't want any blowback about psychological depression and the realities, da-da-da-da-da. He also lowered taxes, as well as interest rates. Donald Trump did that, as did George Bush. He also tried to get Congress and state governments to begin public work programs. Boulder Dam was actually one of those programs. Now, how would doing something like building a dam, how would that help out the people? What are the dams made out of? These are modern dams.
Concrete, I believe.
Concrete, so someone's going to be buying concrete, which is going to help out the concrete companies. Also, that concrete has to be reinforced with steel. Someone's going to be helping the steel company. Oh, wait a minute, the steel company, in order to make that steel, it's going to need iron, it's going to need coal. Those people are going to be helped. You're going to be helping out the workers that are there. You're going to be helping out the agriculture, the places that feed the worker there. You're going to be helping out the gas companies that sell gas to the trucks and cranes and everything else provided. So it was a way to kind of spread out the wealth. But what happened anyway? Well, guys, people still blamed him. By the end of 1932, people had seen their incomes drop 40%. Unemployment was at 25%. Small towns, of course, are hit the hardest. Like you have Denora, Pennsylvania, that had 600 jobs for a population of 12,000. You had some men that left their families out of shame because they couldn't support them, becoming hobos, developing a cowboy mentality for survival. Now, of course, private charities, they did try to help out. They had like soup lines. Only one problem with that. Private charities run out of money. And they can only help so much. We got it? Well, what about at the state level? Well, we had a we had a governor, Ross Sterling, that was a lot like Herbert Hoover, who felt that the government did not need to be involved as much, even though eventually things would happen that would force his hand. He had followed Hobby's years of incredible prosperity. Basically, economically, 105,045 families, about 7.1% of the population were on relief. Next year, there was 246,819 relief cases. About 1 million people, or about 13% of the population. Building was at a standstill. Cotton fell from 18 cents a pound to only 13 cents in 1932. East Texas oil, which was getting 60 cents a barrel in 1930, fell to 5 cents a barrel. Steak used to sell for 18 cents a pound. Milk cost as little as 4 or 5 cents a quart. And hamburgers went for a nickel. Basically, here in Texas, we did have a problem with unemployment, even though it wasn't as bad as the national level. And also underemployment. People who basically could have taken better jobs, but those jobs weren't available. So they had to work what they had to. Cities were going bankrupt. Up here in Dallas, we were depending on the charity of fishermen at Aransas Pass to help us feed our needy. Houston was so desperate to keep money in Houston that it printed its own money. You could only spend Houston money in Houston. Now, why do you think they did that?
Make sure that Houston doesn't disappear, because by the time the Depression ends, it might be that everybody has paid for having food shipped in. That way the money stays in the Houston area and it doesn't become like the town you mentioned that didn't want the railroad coming through.
Yeah. Basically, it's like car washes that give you tokens instead of quarters. They do that on purpose. Try to keep you coming back. Of course, out in the rural areas, you have agricultural displacement, where farmers basically are going bankrupt. As I mentioned earlier, the prices for agricultural goods plummets. To help stop The fall, basically the plummeting of the prices was largely also based on overproduction of goods. And helped try to level out and maintain, if not increase, the price of cotton. The Texas Cotton Acreage Control Law was passed in 1931. That basically limited how much acreage could be used for cotton. And if you limit the supply, the price should go up. Everybody got it? Now another step that was taken, I'm sorry. Meanwhile, farmers also had to deal with the ramifications of the way they had farmed. They basically had gone out there and plowed up the fields that used to be grasslands, and there was no root systems to keep that dust within the soil. That's basically called the Great Plow Up. Then we had years of drought and heavy wind that just whipped off that topsoil. You'd have these huge clouds of dust, sometimes 4 miles high. Were known as black buzzards, because basically if it passed over you, you couldn't really see through anything. And possibly the worst day of the Dust Bowl was Black Sunday, April 13th, 1935, where the dust cloud was so high that reportedly some of that dust fell on London. Thousands flee the area, head out to California, believing that there's going to be work out there, and of course getting out there and finding there's not any. This was brilliantly depicted in the work The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. You all have it? Next, we've got that card in our back pocket. As we come into the 19th century, that changes from being just a jack to now it is an ace. Because of the East Texas oil field. A guy by the name of Columbus Marion, or simply known as Pa Joyner, knew there was oil around Kilgore. He knew it. He was a wildcatter. That's basically somebody who goes out, raises money, and begins to drill wells. Sometimes they know there's oil there, sometimes they got a hunch. Anyway, he goes out there and he raises investment, he sells off shares, he sells more shares than he actually has, which gets him into trouble later on. He drills 6 holes, can't strike any oil. Well, he's got enough money for one last hole. So he loads up his oil rig, all the pipeline and everything like that, on wagons. he's going out to the land that he wants to drill when one of the wheels falls off of one of his wagons. And basically, he can't move. Well, because he can't move, he just drills there. And thanks to that drilling, bam, he strikes oil. Not only that, he strikes the largest oil field in all of the other 49 states. Indeed, that oil field is still producing, and that well, that very first well that he dug, is still producing. Well, like I said, basically, this turns Kilgore, which is about 120 miles east of Dallas, into a boom town. Had a population of 500 in 1929. By 1936, its population had skyrocketed to 12,000 people. And people are drilling anywhere and everywhere. And man, they couldn't be controlled. Basically, the governor had to call out martial law on the town. And guys, because they were dumping so much oil into the system, it was worthless. So he basically limited how much. He said it is going to be the government's job to regulate how much oil you can take out. Which according to Spanish law, we can. If one is to say the government is the king. Even though you can take it out, the government tells you how much you can take out. And basically, he to make it legal, finally gives that authority over to the Texas Railroad Commission. Well, like I told you, good old Paul Joyner, he had sold more stock than he actually had. Well, to help him out of this pickle, a guy who had worked in the East Texas fields as well as Arkansas by the name of H.L. Hunt bought him out for, I want to say, $1 million, even though he could have bought out all his interest for $1.8 million back then. By 1948, he was worth $263 million, making him the wealthiest man in America. Anybody here been out to White Rock Lake? Nobody here's been? Well, there's a home on White Rock Lake that he used to own. Basically, it's called Mount Vernon because it tries to be an exact duplicate of George Washington's Mount Vernon house. Beautiful, beautiful. He also made two other people rich because he didn't realize that they had rights on the land as well, that Paul had sold it off to them. They both live in Dallas as well. Well, the middle and working classes in hard times. Guys, fear was a constant companion. Even if you had a job, you didn't know how long it was going to last. People see businesses go bankrupt. You know, poverty was no longer something that was limited to those people over there or those people over there. Now it could be your neighbor. Now it could be your brother, sister, dad. It could be you. You see people go out and start new businesses. You know, like renting out rooms, opening up bakeries in their own homes. Indeed, one Houston woman had a bakery in her home, and she cleared about $60 a month on that bakery, selling pies at 5 cents a piece, selling loaves of bread at 5 cents a piece, selling pies for 10 cents a piece. City health inspector comes by and sees that she's not meeting health codes. He said, I'm going to have to cut you down. He said, she told him basically, look, if you shut me down, then I'm going to have to go on relief. And that's paid for out of government money. So the health inspector just turned around and she kept her bakery open. Use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without. Kind of became a mantra. You had people sewing their own clothes, baking their own bread, canning vegetables. Indeed, the flour and seed bags back then, basically they were the huge bags. People would buy them and turn them into dresses and clothes. And some of the flour seed companies knew what was going on, so they began to print patterns on their bags so that people could see, hey, this is what the clothes are going to look like once I sew them when I'm done with the bag. Which I think was kind of smart of the flour company. You ready? You had people beginning their own vegetable gardens, for entertainment, going to local parks, or visiting libraries. One of the things I think is so funny is that despite the economic adversity, 65% of all families still spent 10 cents a week to go and see the movies. That's escapism. Pretend you're something else, and just talking about escapism and pretending you're something else, this is when a very popular board game based on Atlantic City, New Jersey, called Monopoly came out, where you could win or lose millions. Or get into big fights with family members. Don't do that deal, it stinks. Shut up, stay out. And 1 out of every 6 families doubled up. What does doubling up mean? Well, it means you got kicked out of your house, so you got to go live with your brother and sister. Or today, you just got out of college, don't have a job. Hey, mom and dad. Everybody got it? All right, minorities in the Depression. Well, Mexican Americans. Basically, America started a deal of repatriation where more than 500,000 Mexican Americans were sent back to Mexico. Indeed, Orange County, California, that's where this picture is from, they used city money to deport 20,000 Mexican Americans. In Texas, it's estimated that 250,000 Mexican Americans went back to Mexico. For African Americans, their lot was rather difficult. Unemployment rates were 20 to 50% higher. And And remember, many African Americans at this time lived in rural areas, and the mechanization of farming put a lot of them out of jobs. You did also have cases of frustrations, like at the Sherman riot of 1930, where a black man was accused of having relations with a white woman. He ran into his house, locked it up, basically, and there was only a group of about 10 people there at that time. They said, we're coming back. They left. They got, about 45 people, huge number. Come back, by that time he was gone. And of course you did have African American resistance against that, but it proved futile. It should be no surprise then that you started to see a great migration, where many of the southern blacks left the South to go to the North. In Texas, Dallas was in a curious position in regards to the Great Migration, because Dallas was one of the few cities in Texas whose African American population actually increased. Even though they had to live in segregated housing and unsuitable housing. But Dallas too acted as a way station, where basically they'd come live for a little while, then continue their trek on north. Sad thing is up north, they'd find the exact same discrimination they thought they had left in the South. Ready for the next one? For Asian Americans, 6 of all Asian Americans were on relief, and they actually received 10 to 20% less than other cultures. Why? Because the government figured out that because they were smaller, they didn't need to eat as much. Well, of course, to fight that discrimination, you start to see the rise of the Japanese American Citizens League. And I was bad in that I meant to start out this lecture with the last slide from our last lecture, where we talk about the formation of LULAC, or the League of United Latin American Citizens, by John Solis here in Texas. Basically to fight for the rights of Hispanics. You ready? For women, probably one of the most famous pictures of the Great Depression. It's a Cherokee woman with her kids. They were paid lower salaries, even though they were less likely to be laid off. Professional positions were declined for them, because many, including the women, felt that men should get the first pick. Now wait a minute, why would women believe that men should get the first pick at jobs?
Traditionally, they were the ones who would bring income into the home, therefore it was pretty much the idea of having the money coming in to provide for the children type thing.
Yeah, this was the time where you only had one working spouse. It's not until much later that it gets to be where you have to have both spouses working. Most companies wouldn't hire married women, and if they found out their employee got married, 63% would be fired. Again, because it's the man's job. And once again, if you're a woman that lives out in the countryside, the rural women, you faced even more restrictions. It wasn't easy for you to get a job as a domestic or as a washer of clothes. You got it? Well, then we have the election of 1932, basically between Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Herbert Hoover. And basically it is a battle of two different philosophies of government. One of the things that Franklin Delano Roosevelt did say was that he wanted direct relief as well as to create a balanced budget. And of course, Hoover was opposed to that. Well, it turned into a landslide for Roosevelt. Hoover only wins 6 states. So now the government is definitely going to get involved in reviving capitalism. Now, Texas had a lot of connections with this. The vice president of Franklin Delano Roosevelt was Texan John Nance Garner, who had been a governor, and indeed the reason why he was chosen to be a vice president is because he was a very strong candidate, kind of like Obama did with Hillary Clinton. He was a strong voice for Texas. Sam Rayburn, who was Lyndon Baines Johnson before he basically taught LBJ how to make the political connections and everything like he did. He was an incredible congressman. And Houston banker Jesse Jones was put in charge of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation that basically was going to go out and secure America's banks. Now, some immediate relief efforts. Guys, people were losing their homes, farmers were losing their farms. So the Homeowners Loan Corporation was put into place that basically people could refinance their home through the government and have lower monthly payments and pay a lower interest rate. More than $100 million was given to this program to aid more than 44,000 Texans. And believe it or not, this was actually attempted again in the 1950s. And Congress actually made a profit off it. The Farm Credit Administration basically did the same thing for farmers. More than 100,000 farmers took them up on it at the cost of $250 million. There you go, the next slide. Work relief. This basically was a program to get jobs to the people. There's a Public Works Administration, also called the PWA. It spent more than $100 million here in Texas on 922 projects, 3/4 of which were construction jobs. And while a vast majority of them were like public housing projects, there were also works that were done to inspire, so that people could see the beauty in it. The tower at UT Austin was one of these projects, completed in 1937, I believe. Houston City Hall, another example. Dealey Plaza here in Dallas, as well as the Riverwalk down in San Antonio. And the Riverwalk was an exceptionally good project because that's one that didn't generate revenue. We ready? We also have the Works Progress Administration Art Project. It was also called Art for the Millions. This is where basically the government went out, gave money to artists, writers, professors, sculptors. Even though most commonly its work was seen in post office murals, where they put up murals showing positive things about America, help keep up morale. Same thing with the plays, articles, books, and lectures. We ready? The Civilian Conservation Corps was begun in March of 1933, reflective of the documentary we saw last time. Here in Texas, it employed more than 50,000 Texans, totally all male, from 18 to 25. Now guys, why do you think you would give men from 18 to 25 specifically jobs? Well, have we seen anything where there's men, majority men, there's some women, 18 to 25 that don't have jobs? Might want to pull down a statue. Might want to ransack a store. Guys, if you don't give this age group a job, they're going to find something to do. And guess what? You probably won't like it. What did these guys do? They built roads, they built dams, they built campsites, swimming pools, breaks in the forest. Here in Dallas, they help beautify and construct sites. There's the campsite at White Rock Lake. White Rock Lake Park. They helped build Huntsville State Park, which some people call the most beautiful park in state park in Texas. And it was actually designed by an African American group that also designed, they won the bid, and I think they designed 2 other parks. They also built access road at Big Bend National Park. And reflective of that documentary, They basically built both the bodies and the minds of the guys that took advantage of this. You know, they were teaching people how to read. You could learn a new skill, like typing, improve yourself. The camps, however, were segregated. But what I think, you see, everybody can go, oh, they were segregated. They separated the blacks and the whites. What I think is exciting is that from 1933 to 1935, they were integrated. But then apparently the locals balked at that. So segregation did come in 1935. And in 1935, the National Youth Administration was passed that Lyndon Baines Johnson helped head up here in Texas. It basically offered part-time work, not the full-time work like the Civilian Conservation Corps. And under this, like the little chapel in the woods out at Texas Women's University. Anybody seen that? It's a beautiful little chapel. A lot of real popular for people to get married there. Anyway, in this group, females were accepted. They could get a job. They could even be stenographers or clerks. And about 75,000 Texans availed themselves of this. This might be our last slide. Then the Agricultural Adjustment Act. Basically, you had to stop the problem here in Texas of low prices due to overproduction. How are you going to do that? Basically, cut back how much acreage farmers were putting under the plow. Well, how are you going to do that? You're going to pay the farmers not to plow. You're going to pay them to keep land dormant. You had the Rural Resettlement Program, which helped some farmers move to richer lands or to different lands. If you did take a subsidy, then basically they'd have to plow your crops under. Indeed, because of this plow up campaign, 4.35 million acres of land, the crops were plowed under, especially in cotton, destroying 27% of the state's cotton. And of course, the farmers aren't stupid. They would take their least productive lands out of production, then they'd use the money that they got from the state to try to buy more fertilizer and use more scientific methods. So the government said, no, I can't do that, guys, sorry. Even though some were hesitant to accept it, some thought that it was unchristian, irreligious to do. But throughout the process, more than $3 billion worth of aid was given. Due to this direct aid, you had sharecropping decrease. And farmers who owned their own land increased from 39% back in 1928 to more than 51% by 1936. Of course, the bad thing is that now farming becomes a heavily subsidized industry.